level. I don't know if you all are aware, but he plays a role specifically with advocacy efforts around the Middle East. He is the liaison bishop to the ELCA Church Council, and I think has a special place in his heart, as we have heard today, for lifting up leaders and helping to find pathways to get the leaders that this church needs into ministry. I'd like to share a little more about me so we can get to know each other a little bit more, and a bit also about the path that brings me here today. So before serving in global mission at Churchwide, as was mentioned, I was a missionary from 2005 to 2012 in Argentina and Uruguay, which is one of your companion synods alongside the Northern Diocese in Tanzania, we have the guest, the presence of Bishop Sho and his wife Janet from that synod there, as well as being the presiding bishop of the church in Tanzania. So yeah, I think I may be familiar to a few folks here. A couple people have come up and said hi to me because a number of the congregations in this synod sponsored me and my family when we were missionaries. We had a number of very faithful, very engaged, and very generous sponsoring congregations in the Nebraska Synod. And I'd like to name one in particular. That's Peace Lutheran Church in Plymouth. As I was preparing to come here, I was looking on the Synod's website and saw that parish ministry associate Maynard Kellerman had passed away in 2018. And he was the PMA at Peace when they decided to sponsor us. And they sponsored us for a number of years. And one time when we were preparing to visit there, Maynard wrote me this half-page email with instructions. This was the first time we were going, with instructions about how to get to Peace in Plymouth. And and at the end of it, he says, or you can use GPS. GPS didn't work to get to Peace Lutheran Church in Plymouth. So we did arrive there. We shared a dinner. My wife and I, we gave our usual presentation. And afterwards, I was talking with Maynard, and as became evident in the conversation there, it's a pretty small church. And they were sponsoring us at a $1,000 level. That's full missionary sponsorship was at that time, which meant that we would go and visit. And I said, Maynard, tell me about this. You all are sponsoring us at $1,000. And he said to me, supporting you is really, really important because it demonstrates what it means to the people of my congregation. It's a way for us to see how it is to be a church in mission. What an example of discipleship was found in him. And discipling leadership. We had many, many memorable moments like that as missionaries and opportunities for life-transforming ministry. One of these was serving in what I would call as like a bridge role, where we got to bring together Lutherans from across great distances, across borders, across cultures and language for fellowship and for worship, eye-opening conversations, and the opportunity to participate in deep, deep, abiding relationships. So I'm getting to this picture, which has been up here for a while now, right? And pictured here is one of the occasions when that took place, and this was in 2006. So this is a flash from the past. This is not a picture of the recent vision trip visit that took place in 2018 or others since then. So in 2006, there were 11 representatives from the Nebraska Synod Women's Organization on this visit. There were 2 representatives from the Lutheran Church in Tanzania, 2 women from that church who traveled with the women from Nebraska to Argentina to spend time with the women in Argentina, visit their ministries, and engage in these deep, abiding relationships. I wanted to share this picture because it brings home to me what I consider to be my job here today as your church-wide representative. And that's tell a little slice of the story of how discipleship comes to life, changes lives, and takes root locally and globally when we can be church together for the sake of the world. On that note, I invite us to watch a video and hear more from Bishop Eaton about just that.
There's a lot going on in our lives and a lot going on in the world. Everyone has a story. You wonder, did they come downtown for a job interview or were they just fired? Did they come downtown to meet a friend or are they just trying to get away? There's a lot of stress and anxiety in the atmosphere all around us and within us. In some ways, it seems that we're more divided than we have been in years. But it's possible to find peace that can be experienced even in the midst of great stress. Because we are loved by Jesus, because in baptism we have become part of His body, even in a downtown setting like this or in a quiet setting at home, we can have peace. And because we have been baptized and have already experienced the only death that really matters, we are able to have difficult conversations with each other. And in church, this might be the one place left where people can encounter each other with honesty and also with openness as we deal with the stress and anxiety of life and these issues that try to divide us. And wherever we find one of our congregations, there is an opportunity to engage the world, engage these issues, to be the presence and the peace of Christ in a neighborhood, in the community that so desperately needs to hear us. And the church does not shy away from these issues. In fact, for such a time as this, we have been called to be peacemakers and healing hands in the world.
Two years ago, for God's Work Our Hands Sunday, we decided that instead of just our church doing a service project together, that we would try to make it a community service project. And so we invited an area mosque to join with us. Their imam was wonderful, and he said, absolutely, I would love to do that. The first year, it was amazing. We did a community food packing event. So we packaged 20,000 meals.
When we first started to have this relationship with the church, we had some members who were prejudiced, who had fears that, Christians don't like us, we are a threat for them, they fear us. But over this years being friends together, coming together, these fears are obviously eliminated. When you look at it as a Muslim, you look at it as a church, from outside it's a building you've never been into, it doesn't look like a mosque, it has a cross on it, and you have your prejudices, but once you step in and you see people that, people have families, they're just like you, and they put their faith in actions, it changes people's view about the religion.
What we've really tried to do is make our presence known in the community. And one of the things that was kind of a no-brainer is that Guest House is just like a block from here.
Guest House is a transitional program for women coming out of jail and prison, and we've been operating in this neighborhood since 1974.
Good Shepherd has had a relationship with Guest House for a number of years, but we've really stepped it up in the last few years. And so right now they use our building Monday through Friday for workforce development classes, and those are classes in work skills. It's probably the closest I've been to the opioid crisis is some of the women who have passed away at a young age and doing their memorial services here. It brings it home that what a crisis it really is. To be able to offer a worship space for them to come and mourn and grieve together, I think has been really important, but it's also been a learning experience.
The women are really like, wow, people want to help me that don't even know me, and they don't want anything in return. That's really powerful. I mean, that's what I think a church does or should do.
To be a community place for people to feel a connection with each other and connection with God.
Not far from where I live, a Lutheran congregation saw an opportunity to reach out to their community, providing lunch every Saturday to anyone who wants or needs it. The Greek word for church, ekklesia, means the called out ones. And God has called us out of the world of indifference or injustice. And God has called us out that we might gather together in community, be fed and nourished by the word and sacraments, so that God can send us back out into the world. Sometimes our fear prevents us from going out joyfully and with good courage. That fear is used to divide us one from another. But perfect love casts out all fear, and we are perfectly loved by God in Jesus Christ. And I want us to remember that when we say, the peace of the Lord be with you all, and answer, and also with you, what we're actually saying is that the peace of Christ is with us now. And so we can go back out into the world to engage and serve with joy. So, go in peace, serve the Lord.
Bishop Eaton reminds us that as disciples of Christ, we are the called out ones, right? We come together in community so that we can be sent right back out, right? To seek out others and make more disciples who do the same. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said something similar in his writings from prison, right at the end of World War II, before he was executed. He wrote, "The church is the church only when it exists for others, those people," right? As we heard this morning. Not dominating, but helping and serving. It must tell men and women, we would say today, of every calling what it means to live for Christ, to exist for others. It's a particular thing as Christians to belong to something. We belong to the church, right? And we support it in so many, many ways, with our time, with our talents, with our treasures. But we belong to something that exists for the people who are not yet members of it, right? This is the heart of discipleship. Bonhoeffer would say costly discipleship, but discipleship is not an abstraction. It takes form in human relationships, in our efforts to heal the world's brokenness and to reconcile with one another and with all of God's creation so that the gospel can have free course in the world, as Bishop Eaton loves to say, and we've heard her say on many occasions. So the report I've prepared is a top 10 list, and it's in no particular order. I'm not going to need a drum roll at the end. Our local musicians aren't here right now. There's a drum up here, but I won't need that, because this top 10 list is no more than a small slice of what our church's discipleship for all the world looks like. So, at a time when one part of the story about church in America today that's out there that we hear, right, is about the decline of mainline Protestant churches in both membership, in both influence in society, and in financial resources, we, the ELCA, decided in 2013 that discipleship points us in a different direction and points us to a different story that we need to be telling about God's future that we are being called into. And we called this the campaign for the ELCA. And you can see from the amount of money we were able to raise while we told this alternative story about the church. And thank you, Nebraska Synod, for the part you played in this campaign. For those who can't see, it's over $900,000 that was given through the end of 2018. And you have played a significant part in making this campaign a success. And the ministry fuel that's been provided to the campaign priorities, along with Mission Share, your Mission Share, and Mission Share that comes from congregations and synods all around the ELCA. And yes, Nebraska Synod, you are number one in Mission Share. Yeah. And thank you for that. This ministry fuel touches everything else that we do that I'm going to talk about, starting with the new Lutheran churches that are being born all around the world right now. Some of the youngest and the fastest growing of these churches are found in Asia, in the countries of China and India and Indonesia and Nepal, Cambodia, and Myanmar. The Lutheran Church in Cambodia, and that's what's pictured here, is a small yet growing church. Significant financial support that's made this growth possible in terms of infrastructure and church buildings and training has come from the campaign for the LCA, from the where needed most specifically. So that's where 50% of your offering from this assembly is being designated to. So I wanted to make sure I made that connection. Cambodia is a church where of young people, and you can see them pictured here. Here, young people come to Phnom Penh, to the capital city, to study, and the church receives them and has a place for them there. Cambodia was a country, you may have heard, remember the killing fields, right? Where a significant part of a whole generation of the population, particularly the most educated ones, were wiped out. So these faces represent a much more hopeful future. So let's connect Cambodia with Christianity's growth around the globe, and particularly in Asia and elsewhere. Did you know that in China, there are more Christians in church on Sunday morning than in the United States? I read that statistic recently and was surprised by it. These are just some of the ways statistics like that and stories about church growth in many places, that the center of gravity of Christianity in many ways is shifting from North America and Europe to the global south, to Asia, to Africa, and to Latin America. There are other Lutheran churches that are coming into existence, like the Lutheran Church in Guinea, in West Africa. What happened there is that there was a protracted civil war in the 1990s in the neighboring country of Liberia, and I was actually recently in Liberia, and yes, they do need rain there. in Liberia, as we heard about this morning. And during this civil war, many people fled from Liberia to the neighboring countries as refugees, including a number of Lutherans who went to Guinea. So while living in the refugee camps, they would gather together to worship, to praise God, and then soon Guineans joined them, and a church was formed. And now this church has their own pastors and their evangelists, and soon will become an independent church. So why do I tell this story? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that one of the missionaries that's supported by congregations in this synod, the Reverend Linda Johnson Seyankulo, helped to train these leaders in Guinea. So your prayers, your partnership, your financial support touched them, the people in Guinea, through her ministry. Linda is pictured on the left here, with her mom is in the middle and her sisters on the far right, and they're all Nebraskans. Some of you may know them. Globally, your mission share also makes possible the ongoing work of preparing the soil for the church's growth. This means grants to seminaries, scholarships for seminarians, and what might seem mundane, like fuel to keep generators going so the lights can stay on in a school or in a hospital. Mission share is critical, so all of us together can be God's hands planting new Lutheran churches in Guinea and in many other places around the globe. So the Young Adult in Global Mission Program, now we're at number 7 on the top 10 list, also known as YAGM. Some of you may have heard how the acronym is pronounced. So what is this? This is a faith-based opportunity, year-long service learning opportunity where young people ages 21 to 29, usually right after college is when folks go. They go and they spend a year abroad. But what's unique about this program, it's an opportunity for our global companions to help form the leaders that our church needs, that are culturally competent, learn languages, know all about the world. See how this program has grown? You can see how that chart goes up. And I'd like us to find ways to continue its growth. It did dip there right in the past couple years. By the end of 2020, there will be 1,000 alumni of this program. Now get this, 1/3 of them go on to go to seminary, to serve as pastors and as deacons of the ELCA. So thank you, Nebraska Synod, for the support you provide to 7 of these YAGM who are serving with the Companion Church in Argentina and Uruguay, as well as the support for the country coordinators, Ignacio and Crystal Marasca. I know the Nebraska Synod Women's Organization provides specific support for Crystal and Ignacio, so thank you for that. But I need to ask you to do one thing, and maybe more than one thing. You saw how this dipped, right? If only just a bit. So I'd like to ask you to take one specific action to make sure that this program is being fully utilized, because if we had more, we could send more. That's our reality right now. It's kind of like the seminaries. If there were more people going into the seminaries are there ready to receive them. So could you make an announcement in church? Could you reach out to your grandkids? Could you talk to your neighbor? Could you take one action post-assembly or as soon as you can? Could we do this? Could I see a show of hands? Who could do this to tell about the YAGM program? And I'll help you. I'll give you a brochure. I've got a pile of them about the YAGM program. Now let's make a connection here, because I think this is one way that you can definitely sow the seeds, right? If I can connect that with your program, what we've been hearing about today, to lift up and engage the leaders that our church needs. So let's do this. Let's do this together. Thanks to you and your support for the campaign for the ELCA, $2.6 million was provided to 254 students. That includes 50 new full tuition scholarships. That's the highest number ever awarded. Now, what Fund for Leaders does, it draws it, because if you know you're going to get a scholarship, you're more likely to study, but it also takes a significant bite out of student debt, right? Which is a national issue for folks in college and for recent graduates, but also a particular issue for students in seminary. It's not just in the United States, but around the world that leaders are being formed, and especially women leaders. Pictured here are participants in the Global Leadership Academy. This was an event for women from 12 of our global companion churches around the world. It was held in India last year in 2018. And what we've learned in this work of women's empowerment is that providing access to these kind of opportunities and to education and to scholarships for women does more than just help one person, right? Than her. It also helps the entire family, and it's a way of lifting up entire communities. Alongside creating these opportunities for women, the work of discipleship is also about the work of justice. The ELCA Church Council recently approved a social statement entitled Faith, Sexism, and Justice, a Lutheran Call to Action. This proposed social statement will be voted on at the church-wide assembly that's taking place in August in Milwaukee, and it will need a 2/3 majority for adoption. And given that 2019 is also at the church-wide assembly the year that we're going to be observing the 50th anniversary of women's ordination, as well as the 40th anniversary of the ordination of the first woman of color, as well as the 10th year since people in same-gendered relationships could be ordained. This particular social statement reflects, but also builds on our church's longstanding commitments. Let's talk a little bit about ELCA Amparo. So what's Amparo about? It's about protection and advocacy for Central American migrant children, youth, and families. Amparo, the word is a Spanish word. It means refuge or protected place in Spanish. And that's really what this is about, discipleship as caring for and wanting to provide protection to our neighbors, particularly our most vulnerable neighbors. I understand that on a per capita basis, Nebraska resettles more refugees than any other state of the Union. So it's not surprising that here on this territory, there's a new guardian angel court watch program. That's one of the things that those who participate in Amparo can do. Go to court accompanying those who have immigration hearings. And you're joining here in Nebraska Synod guardian angel programs that are operating all around the country now. The Amparo participation in the ELCA has been just overwhelming, spectacular. We now have 116 welcoming and sanctuary congregations that are under the Amparo umbrella. And in Nebraska, there are 3, First Lutheran Church and United in Lincoln, and Grace Lutheran Church in Omaha. Well done, well done. Amparo is also about addressing the root causes that drive the migration that we see so much in the media about from Central America, right? Those push factors. Here, in a recent visit that I was on, Bishop Beaton also made this visit to Central America. We were visiting with a family in Honduras, and this family had received a small grant from the ELCA that became an investment in this young man's metalworking business. With that small investment, it's like around $1,000, right? Now he's decided that he can stay put. He tried to go to the United States 6 times and failed. Came back each time, was turned back, was caught, right? And he's decided now, because he has this grant that came from the ELCA, he can stay put. in spite of the poverty that surrounds him. In his particular case, the violence in that particular place is not at a level that makes it impossible to live there. Because when the violence is super high, even if you help out economically, folks still leave. Let me talk a little bit about Lutheran disaster response. Given all that happened in your state this spring with this incredible flooding, right? I mean, I'm trying to think of what more I can say about Lutheran disaster response, right? This is you all. This is the local churches and the members of those churches, you practicing discipleship by walking with impacted families and communities down the long road of recovery. I do want you to know that all of you in this synod has been held in prayer by the whole church. We heard about the tremendous response from states around the country as well as Canada to what happened here in Nebraska. We hold you in prayer, and we also will continue. We also are accompanying you, and will continue to accompany you in this process. Colleagues in the church-wide office said, "Be sure to recognize two people in particular for their leadership around responding to the flooding disaster here in Nebraska." So Lisa Crane and Steve Peterson, thank you for all that you're doing. So elsewhere in the world in 2018, the ELCA responded to 47 emergencies in 33 countries and 32 emergencies in 19 states and territories in the United States. Now, one of those places around the world where we're responding is in Bangladesh. You may have heard in 2017 there was this extreme violence in the country of Myanmar that affected the Rohingya population, and over 700,000 people, like a virtual tidal wave of humanity, moved into Bangladesh. So with support from Lutheran Disaster Response, those who moved into the refugee camp in Bangladesh, we've been able to support 1,000 households there, installing streetlights at the camps, offering psychosocial counseling for the children specifically, and building 78 multi-use kitchens. So those are the specific things that happen around the globe with the support that you provide to Lutheran Disaster Response. This is discipleship that has us touching lives in one of the most horrendous humanitarian disasters of our time. And when it comes to world hunger, I need to say thank you once again to all of you. Your generosity was record-breaking. In 2018, gifts to ELCA World Hunger totaled $23.5 million, marking that's our largest ever annual income for the World Hunger Program, and over $767,000 came from the Nebraska Synod, from individual and congregations right here. This is the generosity that puts us to work addressing hunger and poverty in over 60 countries all around the globe, as well as right down the street, right? In ministries like Table Grace Lutheran in Omaha that serves up food, and also job training to get people better prepared for a better future. And yeah, a better future. God's future is what our church is being called into. This future calls you out, siblings in Christ, to be witnesses to the gospel in this particular place that you have been planted in. We are called out to be discipling disciples, which is about everything that we do as church, whether as peacemakers, whether as healing hands around the globe, lifting up leaders for the vital ministries that our church has, or opening the doors of our congregations to extend a hand to friends and neighbors ravaged by floods in our very own communities, like so many of you have done in recent months. And sisters and brothers, we do this joyfully and we do this faithfully as church together for the sake of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Please send our greetings back to all of your colleagues at the church-wide offices. We appreciate your partnership and the ministry you carry out on our behalf. Thank you. Well, we're not too bad on time. You see, if you look at the bulletin reports, the schedule, the agenda says that the next 2 minutes are set aside for something called Behold, I Do a New Thing. And the subtitle for that section is the Nebraska Synod Theological Education Initiative. That's because even as recently as the time we put together the bulletin of reports, the Theological Education Initiative didn't have a name. And so it was the TEI all the time, which meant nothing to anybody. But that effort, I mentioned briefly in my report, and wanted to open it up just a little bit more to you, to report on exactly what that is. Again, because we are looking to develop leaders across the church, rostered leaders, but also lay leaders, improving their confidence and competence to lead local congregations in the mission we share. We had hoped to offer solid theological education accessibly. And this is happening across the church. There are experiments in theological education in all corners of the ELCA. We happen to be blessed with a number of people with PhDs or other terminal degrees in things like New Testament, confessions, Reformation history, church history, theology, missiology, which is the practice of ministry, and so on and so on and so on. We're just blessed. And we know that there are people who already have lives, even vocations, but who feel that call to serve either as leaders in local congregations or perhaps rostered ministry, PMA, somewhere in between, who just can't pack up everything and move to a seminary to get a theology degree, and or for whom distance learning is uncomfortable or just doesn't work. Not all of us do well learning distance online, or even those who do learn online, typically it means a couple of weeks a year minimum going off to campus in another state for a couple of weeks. And if you've got kids and a busy job, getting that time off can be difficult. So we have this gift of theological educators with a passion to teach. We recognize the need for sharing theological education, and the Spirit moved to bring this all together to suggest that we could really form our own theological education initiative, essentially a seminary without laws. Yeah, that's a good thing. A seminary without walls, a seminary without even a zip code. Because this seminary, as it offers classes, will go to where the students are. Our very first offerings will be in Kearney, right here, this summer at the end of July. But as we look at registrants, registrations, and interest in the program, we will move around the state to where the students are. Every time that a set of courses is offered, the introductory course, which is an introduction to Lutheran hermeneutics, or how Lutherans understand and read Scripture, will be taught. So it doesn't matter when the Spirit finally gets it through your noggin that you should be getting this education, you can start the program. Now, you don't have to finish the program. You don't have to be in a program. But if you are someone who thinks you might want to start putting together a structured PMA preparation series of studies, or a structured team series of studies toward ordination as a pastor or deacon, you have to have that first course. But you can take it because every time we offer the other courses, we'll offer that one. And you can step into the current whenever that works for you and build your classes from then going forward. We hope to make it very affordable. I mentioned that we have an Emmanuel Vision Foundation grant to get us started, to get us organized, but we've built in budgeting that will allow us to pay stipends to the instructors and cover some of the expenses and be affordable to those students who are taking the courses. We also hope that you and your congregations, as you identify people who might be good candidates or students for it, will also encourage with financial support those students who are taking those courses. Remember that the more leaders, lay, PMA, or rostered we train in our own backyard, the more that we'll serve in our own backyard. So there's some self-interest, just to be candid, in us raising up more leaders and preparing them here. What we guarantee, what we're absolutely committed to, is that anybody who takes these courses will get seminary level, seminary quality, seminary equivalent courses in scripture, theology, history, all manner of background of education. We anticipate a number of people will take courses just because they're curious, just because they're interested. Who doesn't want to study the Bible? So it's open to anybody, any of you, for any reason. Lay people just interested in learning are our first category of intended audience. We have 4 intended audiences. The second group is those people who feel they may want to put together a PMA course of studies. There are other ways to do that, but if you do it this way, you have that personal engagement and cohorts to be learning with. The third category is those who may feel called to rostered ministry and who would qualify for team education. You cannot earn a Master of Divinity through this program. We're not an accredited seminary. But team preparation can be done with equivalent courses. You don't get an MDiv, but you get through the approval process, candidacy, qualified education, and you can be ordained. And our fourth category, our fourth target audience, is rostered and lay ministers, particularly rostered ministers, who are seeking continuing education to continue to improve their leadership skills. One of the challenges, you know that your church sets aside $850, $1,000 a year for your pastor or deacon for continuing education. That's fine, but half of that or more typically goes to travel and lodging because there's virtually nothing offered on the territory of the Synod if you want good theological education. It's just one of the challenges of our geography. Now we can make it happen here and make it more accessible for more of our leaders to get education. So those are the 4 target audiences, and that's the kind of program we hope to offer. We'll offer 2 sessions a year to start. That means one would look at it at the longest. If you're looking at a team-type program, you could be looking at 4 to 6 years or more. PMA would be shorter. And if you just want to take it because you learn, well, heck, show up whenever you want. We will be hearing tomorrow from a couple of our educators, a couple of our faculty in the program who will be offering a sample intro course of what that's like to pique your curiosity, to see if you'd be interested in signing up for a course this summer or next January or whenever, or to go home and talk about it, because we hope you will. We would love to have more students interested than we can serve. I mean, a waiting list is a great thing. But this is an innovative, I would say, inspired opportunity for us to be raising up leaders and doing theological education on the territory of our synod. The group that's pulled together the steering committee is also really attentive to the realities of leadership in the 21st century. We hope to be especially sensitive to those people who are also preparing for another vocation or who already have another vocation and intend to continue to be a school teacher, farmer, welder, you name it, and consider serving a congregation in addition. Bivocational ministry is one of the realities of the future of ministry in the 21st century. Full-time congregational calls are going to continue to decline in numbers just because that's the reality of our setting. But if we have people who already have a vocation to pay the bills and to be satisfied in and called to and want to be called to ministry, we want to be sensitive to helping them do that. We're also especially sensitive to the critical role of spiritual formation in theological education. All 7 of our seminaries are committed to spiritual formation happening during the candidacy process. Our entire candidacy process in the ELCA is committed to making spiritual formation, the practice of prayer and deep spirituality, a priority. But the reality is, the resources just aren't there for the seminaries or for candidates on their own, except in the Nebraska Synod, where we happen to have Seeking the Spirit Within Spiritual Direction Institute. And so from the time those academics, the first small group, started meeting, they said we have to have Seeking the Spirit Within involved, because spiritual formation and solid spiritual grounding is going to be a hallmark of education through the Emmaus Lutheran Leadership Academy. That's critical. We don't just want people who know, we want people who believe, leading our congregations in ministry. So that's a taste of what's happening through the Emmaus Lutheran Leadership Academy. You'll be getting more information through the mail, email, other notifications across the Synod throughout the summer. But because it's also a wonderful tie-in to Seeking the Spirit Within, and because this is the 10th anniversary year of Seeking the Spirit Within, I wanted to yield some of this time to invite Connie Stover to come forward to speak as well about what Behold, I Do a New Thing means from the perspective of the Spiritual Direction Institute. So please help me welcome again and thank Connie Stover for her leadership and direction of Seeking the Spirit Within. Connie's a woman of great vision, but like me, weakened eyesight, so she needs her glasses. Welcome, Connie.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be able to speak again with you about the ministry of Seeking the Spirit Within. About 13 years ago, the first seedlings were planted for this ministry. It came about because of the strategic planning process back in 2006. And because of the planning process, that resulted in a series of findings as rostered ministers were polled and information gathered. And it became clear that the primary one conclusion was that the root of Christ's mission anywhere at any time is spiritual leadership. So feeding the leadership of the Nebraska Synod became the key goal of the subsequent Nebraska Synod campaign. And it was for leadership and youth. It was the intention of that campaign that we would raise new leaders and grow our current leadership, both rostered and lay people, to deeper spiritual levels. The hoped-for outcome was ministry settings that are welcome places, reflecting Christ's love. Seeking the Spirit Within, the Institute for Spiritual Direction Formation of the Nebraska Synod, is a direct result of the findings of that strategic planning process. Rostered ministers within our synod were polled regarding their self-perceived most important personal and professional need as leaders. Well over half of the rostered ministers who responded raised the need for spiritual retreat and spiritual direction as their primary need at that time. So initially, the campaign sought to provide opportunities for spiritual retreat and to identify, certify, and make available about 6 to 8 spiritual directors who would be available across the Nebraska Synod. So a task group was assembled to explore this, and in this process of exploration and research, they concluded that the Nebraska Synod should develop its own institute for the certification of spiritual directors. So the first cohort began in 2009, their time of study. And we've got some folks here who were in that very first group. Stand up, folks. Those of you who were in the very first cohort of Seeking the Spirit Within. They call themselves the guinea pigs because it was a process of learning what works and what doesn't work. And I heard that they were pretty vocal about what didn't work. So in 2009, that first group got started. So this is our 10-year anniversary because it was 10 years ago that first group got started in their formation process. So 10 years ago, the new thing that God was doing in the Nebraska Synod was birthing, seeking the Spirit within. And at the time of that 2006 strategic planning process, there was one certified spiritual director in the Nebraska Synod as a member of a Nebraska Synod congregation. And that was Vera Hummel, who was on the Synod Council at that time, and she became the founding director of Seeking the Spirit Within. So there was one in 2006. 10 years later, it's a 2-year formation program, intentionally taking 2 years because it's a formation program, not just a learning program. We have now certified 60 individuals to be spiritual directors for others. And, yes. And 44 of those, out of those 60, at the time of their certification, were members of Nebraska Synod congregations. That very first group were all members of ELCA congregations. And with the second group, the decision was made to open it up to other Christian denominations, people who come from other traditions. And so there have been people from the Methodist, Presbyterian, UCC, Disciples of Christ, evangelical churches who've been part of our program and been certified as well. And we have 13 more people who will be entering their second year of their training or their formation program in September. And that is the 6th group. Which I think those people who were part of that initial planning process never dreamed that there would be 6 groups of people go through this certification process. And it is clear that the Spirit is not done working with this program because people continue to contact me, ask me about the program. And as Bishop indicated, even people outside the Nebraska Synod are contacting us saying, tell us about your program. At its beginning, 10 years ago, Seeking the Spirit Within was unique within the ELCA as the only spiritual direction formation program sponsored by a synod of the ELCA. Well, 10 years later, 6 groups later, 60 certified spiritual directors later, we are still unique within the ELCA. So my main purpose in coming before you today is to tell you thank you. Thank you for being a synod that has the courage, the wisdom to follow Christ wherever he leads. And that always leads us into new things. Wherever the ministry of Seeking the Spirit Within and the Nebraska Synod go as we live into the future, may we always, always, always be moving in the direction that the Holy Spirit is leading us. I have years of teaching of confirmation. One of the things I liked to teach was, what does the word amen mean? It means yes, it shall be so. Yes, it shall be so. And so. All God's people say, Amen. Thank you.
That side was getting too furry. Our evening session will begin here at 6:30 this evening with a presentation on accompaniment by the local musicians and also a keynote by presiding Bishop Show. Then we will join in singing some favorite hymns at Brews and Hymns. There'll be a cash bar with selections from local microbreweries. Also available will be wine, root beer, coffee, and water. After a prayer, we'll break for dinner. It begins immediately at 5:30 p.m. in the Crystal Ballroom across the hall. The Minutes Committee will pick up their dinner and meet upstairs in Ruby 2. The ministry partner tables will remain in the hallways until tomorrow at noon. And finally, please remember the 5K run and walk is tomorrow at 7:15. Registration opens at 7 o'clock outside of the Eunice Center's main lobby doors. And now I would invite Greg Sherman to lead us in prayer and the singing of the doxology.
Please rise as you are able as we lift our voices in prayer. Be present at our table, Lord. Be here and everywhere adored. These mercies bless and grant that we may strengthened for our service be. Amen.